Hello today. We're going to go through another episode of the In the Loop podcast, and I've got with me James Woodard. And James, I was reading something on LinkedIn that really spurred this conversation. You and I had gotten connected through some other business engagements, but you had written a post, and you said, let's see, about a failure for digital transformation, that one of the factors, why something didn't work is either the vendor didn't understand the asset before they proposed a solution. The operators were they in the room during the design, and not just during training, and whether someone actually owned the outcome after the implementation was done.
Yeah.
And I read that and I thought, man, there's a podcast right there. Just those three words, because we've actually written we set out to write a blog one time about, hey, why do digital projects fail? And I mean, digital transformation, digital project, similar situation. You're typically talking about a software that's going to try to be a solution, and you're saying, okay, why are those projects so hard? Because I think you can look up online and you say, hey, 70% of digital transformations fail.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And so we're gonna dig into that. First, though, real quick, give me a little bit of background so we can set the table.
Yeah, for sure. And again, thank you for having me on. So, so background is mechatronics robotics engineering from Georgia Tech. So got my MBA, Master's of Business Administration from University of Texas at Austin. And I've done some postgraduate work as well in business applications associated with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and then also one of the more kind of bleeding edges of that on the agentic AI, agentic systems of that as well. So a very interesting blend. And I did that all while going through predominantly asset intensive operations, heavy industrial. So a lot of oil and gas, a lot of discrete manufacturing, a little bit of defense in there. So like all of that. So that's kind of the background with me. But going to your questions and what I wrote about, it is very, very interesting because, and this is just, again, speaking from my opinion, my experience and what I've seen thus far, is it's kind of odd to me that if you look at the grand scheme of software, I don't think it's changed. What I mean by that is that developers come in, executive teams for clients say, build me something. The software developers, engineers build something, and then they deliver it, and then they kind of walk away. And if you think about that, it's like on its face, like, okay, well, something was achieved. But what was actually achieved? What was actually built? What value was actually developed off of that? Were the right people in the room to scope? I mean, I'll be forthright. I've been in the room where we literally have gotten no scope from a client, and we've had to push back, like, how am I supposed to build something for you if I'm a product manager or a director even, that's going to be effective when you can't even give me a firm scope on the front end? So,
yeah. Well, some of the scenarios I've seen, and we'll use this like in the context of just a digital project. Could be an implementation, could be a new software, could be a migration, whatever. Defining the finish line is, when you're talking about a physical construction, well, the finish line is obvious, right? We have to build this thing. It's a bridge, it's a building, it's a plant. Well, it needs to be operational. But when you're building something digital, defining what complete is a big part of that, right? And I would say that one of the reasons that you see digital projects fail is there wasn't a reasonable understanding of what the end was.
No, agreed. And I would say, to segue off of that, I think that's also kind of a byproduct going back to software is, I almost think in the last couple decades, we got app happy. Okay, we're going to have version 1 of an app. It does the base level thing. So, using terminology, it's a minimal viable product. It does a little bit of something, but a whole lot of nothing. And we're just going to iterate and uptick it and change it and whatnot. And the reason why that got so popular per se is because in itself, by delivering something very quickly, it's a hook and it keeps someone on there. And it's like, ooh, okay, there's something that's been delivered. And then you just keep iterating it and iterating through Scrum methodologies. But the thing is, when you're working with heavy industrial assets, that minimal viable product, that bottom line of what you need to hit on the front end actually needs to be a whole lot more. And to be honest, like, even though you still need to update and iterate against it from an agile standpoint, there needs to be, just like how we build physical assets, because I've been on that side too. I mean, I've built, $250 million code generation plant in like Iraq with Shell. Like that's a waterfall mentality. Like the only determination of success is that whole project is finished, fully commissioned, operational, go from there. So you need a bit of a mix of both mindsets when it comes to developing something, because this can't just be like, okay, here's application level. It's like beta testing. It breaks a lot. It doesn't have a whole lot of like uptime. It's like, that's not good. Like you need something that actually delivers value that, in case of engagements I've been involved with in the past, operations, engineering, technical personnel are like, hey, like we actually got some value out of this that's given us a better, at a minimum, situational awareness of what's going on.
I've seen that quite a bit here recently with AI technology. One of the things that AI is really good at is taking older pieces of data, pictures and documents that in the past didn't feel like data. They felt like something you had to read with your eyes.
Yep.
And the AI tools say, well, look, I can process that through intelligent, text reading, OCR, document processing, and I can turn that PDF that you had or that image into tags, text and tags and everything like that. But a lot of times, because that is new and that is exciting, the secondary, okay, well, what am I going to really do to drive value from that is left out of that. It's just like, look what I can do. I took 100,000 documents, I made them all readable, searchable, but that's not really a solution. That's a starting point, right? And unless you've outlined what you're going to do with the fact that, okay, yes, now I can search those better, but was that good enough to call it a solution? Is a little bit I think of the challenge is like, so the initial rollout feels successful for a moment, but then the long-standing value feels like, okay, now we have to define workflows on top of that. They're going to bring value, and so when you talked there just a minute about the iteration process, and you specifically use the agile development strategy, which is really a development management strategy to where you take small steps, you review progress, you rebaseline, you take another small step, versus the waterfall where you have a longer vision, I think, of exactly what you're supposed to deliver, and you take it one step at a time until completion. I think naturally, that's one of the reasons I liked development in the first place. Coming out of engineering school and figuring out what I wanted to do, I actually loved development because of the small iterative feedback loop.
Yeah.
Build something cool, test it. Does it work? Great. Build better, build more, and you get this immediate feedback. Because when you're building something physical, you don't get immediate feedback.
Yeah.
You design it, you patiently wait for it to be constructed, you start it up, and then you get your feedback, so it's a little harder. And I think, though, unfortunately, that interest or that propensity to like that little short feedback loop also creates problems for these projects.
Yes.
Because what happens is you get a project team that's accustomed to being a development mindset, and it feels like, well, I don't have to have the long plan totally laid out. I'm just going to make this thing awesome one step at a time. However, that leads to a project that sometimes never finishes.
Yes.
When does a developer say it's done, it's perfect? Because the developer's never done, right? They're always looking for another feature.
Yes, agreed.
And so setting in a culture of short iterations, setting a scope, schedule, and budget, I think, is a huge challenge.
Yes, agree. And that's even speaking to when we're focusing more and more on transformation and, my last role. So moving from, pure product management of, like you said, like, okay, there's a set end date in mind, whether it's for a platform or a tool / application, or even something in the background related to infrastructure or something else as an add-on outside of that. You have to decide, okay, we need to have a time horizon of which we're going to achieve something across. And obviously we're going to iterate within that time horizon, but we need to work backwards from what the end goal is. So kind of like I alluded to earlier, it's like, especially when it comes to like heavy industrial assets, you need to have a very firm definition of what success is. Again, as you alluded to earlier, but you need to iterate towards that, because what happens is, and I mean, all of this, we're talking in technical kind of project management terms, but to be honest, like we're really talking about is like human psychology. It's like at some point we all get bored doing things and the shiny toy is no longer shiny. And we get, we want to move on to something else, or we want to move on to another client or another project, another technology. It's all very just truisms to those things. So to your point, if you have something that's in perpetuity, at some point it's going to go off the rails. It's going to drift. The scope is going to become unclear. People are going to start throwing ad hoc scope at it. It's like, what the heck's going on? Budget's not going to necessarily be there, or you're going to have a budget overrun, or people are doing scope changes and budgetary changes. Like that doesn't make any sense. And so when we did the transformation exercises, we really set out like, okay, here's a 1-year time horizon, 3-year time horizon, 5-year. If we got the 10, I mean, that was, to be honest, it was almost like making a wish, like just to be blunt with you. So it's like, it wasn't
a lot
real.
Can change in 10 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you bring up a good point. If I look from a development perspective, if I don't have a long-term vision and I just think I'm going to iterate slowly to get there, that's not great because it's hard to keep that on track.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, if I say, hey, my end point is here, I'm just going to go off and configure it and I'll let you know when it's done. That also doesn't work well in software because the understanding that end goal and the communication, because there's so much configuration involved, right? I mean, if I'm doing a compressor and the whole job is to take gas from this pressure to this pressure, well then, yeah, I can go off, build a compressor and just show up with it and you say, here's the machine, right? It does what you asked me to do.
Yeah.
But in software, I don't think you have as clear of a spec. So on one hand, you just iterate forever, and that's not great. On the other hand, if you don't communicate and you don't share, then you build something totally wrong, right? Yeah. So in the middle is what I've seen more success, where you try to manage it like a physical asset. Even though it's software, you try to manage it like a physical construction project, scope, schedule, budget, but you have an increased sharing feedback loop to say, I do have to show you incrementally that we're getting there, right? So some sort of middle ground, I think, is where you want to be, but I see projects that don't know how to run it that way, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I would agree with you on that. And I think a couple things with that. One, if you're as a vendor, speaking from the vendor side, because I've been on both sides, both the owner operator and the vendor. If you're a vendor and you're not bringing the engagement, well, you're going to know real fast because your owner operator for whatever you produce, especially say digital twin, they're going to look at your digital twin, look at the assets like that doesn't look like that. They're going to let you know real quick, and you're going to have a big issue on that hand. Likewise, too, as an owner operator, you are doing something that if we really think about just looking at oil and gas, which you and I know both very well, they're not used to these new technologies. So the trust factor from a human level is already not very high. This is very suspect. So if I see something that does not conform, and if people are not communicating with me, I'm just going to be perfectly blunt with you. It almost seems like a scam. They took my money. I'm not seeing something delivered on return. I need engagement here.
Well, yeah, and that's where communication is so important. When I think of projects we've had that haven't gone well, they've been scenarios where we were not transparent enough in our communication, and we weren't sharing that. We assumed that everything was in good standing. The client assumed that everything was in good standing. You get to the end, you're at 2 different destinations, and it doesn't go well. So I think communication in a world of developer-minded folks is really important. Another thing I think why you see failures is expectations.
Yes.
A software brochure, or as I like to call them, kind of like that laser lights fireworks show that you get at a conference or a demo. Applying the whiz bang that is presented to a real world scenario, I think the vendors, unfortunately, they have to sell a very optimistic success.
Yes.
And then delivering on that can be a challenge. So what you get in the end sometimes is a buyer that doesn't feel like the end product kind of met up to that expectation that was given. Does that seem fair?
No, that's fair. And again, it's like, this kind of goes back to my point about like, if it's not meeting what they have in mind. And that's going back to your point too about communication. Realistically, if you do not have sound communication, sound, you know, points of like, okay, this is what's being built per scope, and like I said, this scope could be even be in flight. Ideally, you don't want it to be. It's like if you don't have that, expectation kind of reality check, it's going to get to a point all the way through where, again, going back to what I alluded to earlier, it's going to seem like almost a scam. Because I saw a meme the other day where it's like most software, it's like you get a pilot, to your point, like a demo, it's like a brand new, like one of these like designer prototype vehicles you may see at a motor show. And then like a couple years later, it looks nothing like it, performs nothing like it. And everyone's just like, what the heck? And then the price tag's still like through the roof. And like, well, no one's happy now and whatnot. And so that thing gets scrapped, never hits mainstream production outside of that. So,
Well, have you seen the meme of the development cycle where if your aim is to develop a vehicle
mhm,
and you go and you start by building the chassis and by putting on wheels and then by eventually building a frame and then eventually a
mhm,
steering wheel. The problem is you may never get the thing on the road because you're doing a whole shot. It's kind
exactly.
of like that concept I mentioned a minute ago where you just go off and you try to build the entire solution at once.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you start with a skateboard and then you successfully say, okay, I was able to navigate, down the street. Now I want to turn that into a scooter. So let me take my learnings, make a scooter, and then I'm going to go from that to a bicycle and then to a motorcycle and then to a car.
Yeah.
That development strategy of incremental wins and then reassessments and improvements have seen be much more successful than the whole shot, strategy of we're just going to build a perfect thing from the beginning. Does that
Agreed.
make sense?
Yeah, no, agreed. And I've seen that as well. And so it again, it goes back to, I think, what we talked about a good portion here is it's that hybrid of you do need to iterate, but you need to iterate each time with something that brings incrementally increasing value in a more expedited time frame than maybe what we're used to for waterfall, or maybe in terms of greater value, what maybe even from an agile standpoint, software development's kind of used to in some ways too.
Mm-hmm.
You have to like blend those two together. And it's hard because again, to be blunt, talking about how like humans are wired, if you think about that level of communication, that detail, and you think about that even like over a 1 year time horizon, if you're trying to scale, going to something near and dear to me recently, it's like the digital twins, the generative AI, the agentic solutions of the world. If you do that over just like a handful or two handfuls of assets, that's a very intensive exercise for all parties involved. So it's like you have to be on point the whole entire time. You have to be attentive the whole entire time, communicate the whole entire time. And admittedly, a lot of people are just not prepared for that. So it's like you have to understand one, what you're in for, but two, kind of going into how tools can be used, you also need to leverage tools in terms of how you can take that information in, how you can make better decisions, things off of that. So there's a whole leveraging of not just building things for like an industrial standpoint, like a twin and whatnot, but there's also just even our basic communication back and forth, like summaries of, like for this instance, this podcast, someone could probably watch this right now. There's probably a summarized transcript through natural language processing of AI, and you can get the tidbits out of this as opposed to listen to me meander on the whole entire time. So,
Well, now two more aspects, and they relate to what had originally caught my attention from your writing, and that was the operator or the user in the room during design, and basically, do you have buy-in? I mean, that's the
yeah,
basic idea, right? Because a lot of times, if you're a leader, if you're a tech leader or an operations leader or whatever, you got to make decisions that you think are going to support the team.
yeah,
And that team's not necessarily going to love that decision right off the bat, maybe, but you have to look across the landscape, say, we need a solution for something. We've evaluated, we've made a choice, and then you got to bring that business users in,
yeah,
and they've got to understand it and have some buy-in, because if they want it to fail, and not that it always has to be like wanting it to fail, but I'm saying if they don't want it or don't know that this is going to be helpful, then it's obvious it's going to struggle, right?
yeah,
And so getting that buy-in is an important one. And then also related to that, supporting it once the tool is finished, the transformation, the solution is in place, having the stewardship there to keep it up.
Yeah.
right? Because we like to say that software alone isn't really a solution.
Correct.
It takes the workflow, it takes the people and the tool in order for it to really be a solution.
Yeah.
If you just install it and walk away, that's probably not going to be successful.
Agreed. And to touch on that, I'll go back to your first point. Is I tell this to people all the time, and it causes some rolling of eyes and some groans, but realistically, from what I'm seeing, and when we talk about digital transformation, it's change management while leveraging new technology, which people inherently hear change management like, oh no. And it's like that's a long process. You want to change how I'm doing work, you want to change all these different things. It's like it's just a lot, and people I get it. I totally understand it. But the reality is, and we've seen this for firsthand as well, if you approach digital transformation, especially AI, like I use this analogy all the time, I think we can all agree smartphones for the most part, are relatively intuitively able to use. Like you basically just drop them in your hands, you can kind of go to town with it. Now, I would argue we can't optimally use that technology though. It still takes some deeper training. But my point is we thought, I think in the grander scheme of things, regardless of domain, industrial-wise, we thought AI and this digital transformation standpoint would kind of be like a cell phone. All right, you'll mess around with it enough, you'll figure this out, you'll use it. That's not the case. So going back to your standpoint of like, was the operator in the room? We had operator production SMEs there, but were they really the people that are going to be using it day in, day out? To be honest with you, no, not for the most part. So it's like that was a misstep, a misfire. And even when we did get them involved, something was already built, and their feedback would be like, well, this isn't built to the way I would use it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
it's like, so you have that big problem there. So
It's interesting you bring up the smartphone because that is a good example of something that you're just supposed to figure it out.
mm-hmm.
And everyone seems to be pretty capable of figuring it out. Now, I have figured out my phone.
Same.
Now, my wife has a different
Mm-hmm.
operating system, or my kids, and I actually pick up their phone and I feel totally out of place and I
Yep.
don't even know how to get to the basics. So that's a little bit interesting. I'm sure I could figure that out, but it is a very interesting example of something that really we don't plan any training for that. We
Mm-hmm.
don't. You just go buy it, they give it to you, they expect you to walk out and figure it out. And even though, of course, out there in the world, we have people with differing educations and IQs and whatnot, for some reason that the use of that device has been pretty much universally able to be figured out. Yeah, I mean, everyone who pays for a phone eventually figures out how to text and how to get to the web and how to make a phone call. So that is a good analogy, but we don't see that as much
No.
with the type of tools that you see in industry, that they're just not something you just figure out.
No. And
You need more support in order to make that successful.
agreed. I think, if I was to oversimplify it, I think it's because when that technology, we can even go with the application, social media. I think you and I talked on the phone about that a little bit too. It's because that was developed with a human in the center of it and a human to use that. What we did with AI is, and I think this is why we're kind of seeing this pushback on something we'll talk about probably a little bit here shortly too, and whatnot, is AI wasn't necessarily designed with humans in the middle of it. It was kind of designed with like, well, could we get the human on the edge or maybe outside this altogether? So it's like when you're doing like, like this thing is not hitting the mark like we wanted to. Now we got to figure out how to put a person in the middle. It's like, oh no, like how do we redesign this from like a behavioral cognitive science way of like getting a user involved, getting a user want to use this, getting a user comfortable with using this and things like that.
Well, it's a little harsh, but there's a saying sometimes used that sometimes you have a solution looking for a problem.
Yes.
And in some instances, AI can have that feeling because it's undoubtedly cool,
Mhm.
right? I mean, wow, look at the ability to understand this and the ability to process it. But what does it do?
Agreed.
You know what I mean? And obviously there are plenty of applications where AI has been applied successfully, but there are other cases where you've got this cool capability, but no clear roadmap to how it's going to help accomplish a task or really markedly improve, a workflow or something like that.
Agreed. And the point on that is like, I'll be the first to be transparent. I love AI and robotics and all the cool tech stuff. I've loved it since I was a kid. My parents could attest that. I'm also the first person to tell you, like, if you don't need AI, I'm not going to give you AI solution. If you don't need robotics, I'm not going to give a robotics solution. I've had countless conversations with industrial or asset intensive operational clients of like, have you even tried logic-based programming, rules-based programming? Have you tried optimization of parameters? Have you tried basic machine learning? They're like, no. I was like, well, let's start there first. Like, even before that, what's even your data? What's your data quality? Do you know where your data streams are coming in? Like, if you don't have a base level understanding, I'm not going to throw AI at you, because all of a sudden this shiny toy in a couple of months' time, you're gonna be like, I hate this because it doesn't work like I want to. It's super expensive, especially if you use certain frontier models like Anthropic is incredibly expensive because it's not a price per seat license like most people are familiar with software as a service. It's usage based. So you may have an individual who's like using Claude Code or Claude Cowork for just everything. And it's like, why does, the hypothetical Craig, why is Craig spending $50,000 per month to do his work? I mean, like, that's not good. So it's like you have these issues that if you don't have a base level understanding of your stack and what you're trying to achieve, me suggesting and then building AI solutions for you or robotic solutions for you is pointless for you. I mean, if I'm a vendor and I don't care about a relationship moving forward, I'll do it and take your money. But like the reality is, I think most businesses, rightfully so, are trying to have long-lasting, reoccurring revenue type relationships. So that's more of a partnership and trying to help each other get to a mutual point.
Okay. So, that initially got my attention in terms of digital transformation struggles. Like I said, if you search that on the web, I mean, you'll find plenty of numbers that say, they're a high probability of failure. And I think some of these things we touched on are really important for that. And it was interesting to see you come up with those similar to experiences that we've had.
Yeah.
Now I wanna pivot a bit and ask you one short question.
Go for it.
Which is, for you, what's the definition of a digital twin?
Ooh, for me, a digital twin is essentially at a base level your data stack of what you have and how you actually take action at your facility. Which a lot of people are like, well, if there's no visuals, is it really a twin? And my answer would be, if you can map out the data you need to make decisions and track those decisions, I could care less. I have visuals involved. I need to track that. And the reason why I say that is because we've literally had these conversations with people and I'm sure you've seen this too. I've been in operations before at not picking on midstream, but I'm going to bring up midstream is, it's not necessarily the revenue generating part of oil and gas. It's not bringing oil to the ground. It's not turning the feedstocks or fuels. It's moving stuff from A to B. And even though they're supposed to have procedures, I've literally seen the exchange of information done by pin on hand or pin on napkin. And people are like, well, that's no way to map out process. Like, okay, it's not the best way, but is everything falling apart right now? They're like, well, no. I was like, so everything's operating? Yes. And information is being exchanged? Yes. Okay. So we just need to define that a little bit better, map out that whole decision-making process, and I can build a twin off of that. I just need to capture that base level information that's exchanged, the decisions take for that information to be exchanged, what comes out of those actions, and go from there. Then we can build visuals on top of that. So that's how I would look at that.
Okay, because to me, when I'm speaking with someone in an engineering context and I say digital twin, a lot of people immediately go to the simulation of the thing. So if it's a plant or if it's a machine, to where I can see it sort of virtually running, and then I could adjust it and I can see the reaction of the machine downstream, of the change I've made. And that's a twin, sort of like a physics or chemistry twin of that thing. Now, I step back a little bit for our business, and I do like to look at the informational twin, which is really just a roadmap of something. Very similar to Google Maps, where you can zoom in on a restaurant and then you can go down the list of the hours and the menu and the reviews and all that sort of stuff. And there is a simple twin that I use to navigate and find information. And then I can move from that potentially into more of a simulated twin. But I just kind of like to differentiate between the two, because I think a lot of times the folks that we're talking to are really thinking about information
Yeah.
as what they need first.
Yes.
And then eventually they want to get to the video game version of their operating unit, and they do want to really stretch the capabilities of a twin. I just don't like to skip to that, because I think that's more maybe from more of an academic perspective. In the real world, you have to realize just how many holes there are in the data sets that are out there, and the fact that you can get a lot of value from a twin that is a road, as a map of a facility. And you're right, visualizing that, whether you do it 3-dimensionally, which is kind of the Cadillac version, or whether you do that 2-dimensionally, or whether you even do that on more of like a list or something. Technically, that could still be a twin if it summarizes the whole process. But yeah, you can change the canvas, I like to call it, upon which you look at that.
Yeah.
But what you want to stay away from is a scenario where there really isn't a data set to work with, and everything is just some sort of picture and or file that doesn't connect. So to me, it's connected information that gives you the roadmap of a facility. It's kind of like your level 1, your basic twin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you're exactly right, because we've been there in the past because again, it's kind of funny is we've built demo environments. And so you would think, to your point, the Cadillac version, the visuals, you think that'd be the hardest part. Actually, it's not. Like, there's stock visuals. You can make stock plants easily. What's the hardest part is that informational graph model that's underneath, because you need to create synthetic data and you need to tie that all together. And you do have some templates, with certain assets within certain industrial sectors, what that looks like. But then as well, you don't have that exchange of, okay, what's the full process we mapped out? You can have like a rough, simplified template of a process. And even, like you mentioned too, with simulators, you can have like, when do I need to engage a simulator? What's the inputs for that? What are the expected outputs against that too? What am I seeing in the field, whether it's actual or synthetic, compared to what's predictive that comes out of a simulator? That's all great. But again, if you don't have that underlying like graph model of like the pertinent information that actually runs the facility and decision cycles and process cycles that are engaged there, you really don't have a digital twin. So
yeah, if you're looking at an airplane or a car and you're talking about the wind effects and you're talking about the weather and the aerodynamics of that, well, you need a twin that's going to help you determine performance and going to determine actions for safety scenarios and all that. So you really do need that simulated physics environment as a twin. But if I'm going out to a refinery or a chemical plant or a LNG plant, whatever, I also could use that, but also I just need to know where something is wired, where it is, how it's connected back to an MCC, how it was piped, because I just need to find it and I need to study it, or I need to replace it. So I don't necessarily have to re-engineer the thing, but what you realize when you get into the operating facility world is that a lot of those drawings and all of those guidelines got lost. And now that plant's being run the same way you maintain your home, which is you run till failure and then you replace, right? But the strategy that you use at home with your light bulbs and your ceiling fans is not the strategy that you can afford to run with at a plant, right? When a ceiling fan goes out, well, it's just slightly warm for a little bit, but the house is fine. I can go to the store, pick a new one, and replace it. So I didn't need a perfect history of everything, right? But in a facility, if I have a piece of equipment that's critical go out and I don't have the schematics and I don't have the data sheet, so that information digital twin is the first level to me of the digital twin. And then you can couple that with the more sophisticated science version of that.
Agreed.
Okay, well then one more thing. You also described a little bit about infrastructure, and this is going to transition from a software discussion into more of a real world discussion with the demand for energy and the demand for storage space related to clouds and AI and computing power, there's this ongoing debate about data centers
Yes.
and the resources that it takes to run a data center.
Yes.
Where do they need to go? The jobs they create. And I know you have some insight into this world. So share a little bit about what you're seeing there.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to data centers overall, I think we're still very much in the early stages of what the long-term design is going to be. What I mean by that is I think everyone has seen the news of these massive facilities that are going to have potentially 1 to anywhere I've seen it as high as 3 gigawatts. Now, for reference, 1 gigawatt is the equivalent of powering 1 million homes. So
Okay.
if you imagine 3, that's 3 million homes. And as you can imagine, that's just off the top of your head. That sounds like a lot of power and a lot of water and a lot of the utilities we use day in, day out. So that gets everyone's antennas up,
Yeah.
to say the least. So you have that. What we're seeing moving forward is that already, what I would call version 0, these giant facilities, there's been considerable pushback. Actually, there was a comment the other day I was listening to, something that never has there been a time in the history of the U.S. when it comes to protesting, something that's a commercial thing, you probably had the highest success rate to protest, because wherever there's been a large scale protest of these super large data centers in terms of campuses, whenever there's been sustained protest against it, there's a 40% chance again those things completely mothballed right now.
Okay.
That's how much pushback there is on this. So, as you can read this up too, you starting to see a splintering of what I would say is version 1 of the next phase. And I'll bring up 3 that are very interesting to me overall, and I'll touch back why that's happening too, besides some of the other numbers I've given up. So version number 1 is another homegrown company, or relatively homegrown, but home operated company here in Texas, is SpaceX. SpaceX, as we all know, is going to most likely go public in the coming weeks. They keep kind of teasing when they're going to go public, but they're going to go public. What they're going to do as part of their planning, and they already signed an agreement with Anthropic over the weekend, I forget for how much, but it was in the billions, is they're going to develop near Earth orbit data centers. So it's going to be a distribution data center cluster, and essentially that's going to mitigate a lot of the concerns around power, because solar, you're going to mitigate the power, the issue around cooling, because space is pretty cold for those who haven't been up there. So you have a lot of things like that. And actually, if you think about it from a very simple standpoint, the satellite arrays we have in existence actually already function like data centers. They onboard and stave data within the actual hardware that is with the satellite itself, and then distributes it back to other locations around the world. So essentially, you're just trying to supersize your onboard storage capacity and there's no data, and then having a relay effect where you can go that. So that's version 1. So we'll call that Elon's. There's Peter Thiel's. Peter Thiel's is putting, for those that haven't heard either, he's put, oh God, I forget the valuation of this. It's somewhere in the $1 billion ballpark, but he just had another funding round. He's doing ocean-based data centers.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to have cooling through ocean water. Now, jury's still out. I haven't seen the data. How much is that going to heat the ocean? Because as we keep hearing all the time, our ocean ecology is very fragile due to pollution and other things. So we're already having issues with, per data in certain studies, overfishing, things of this nature. So there's that. But it also mitigates the issue of taking our fresh water to help cool this thing and using seawater instead.
Yeah,
So,
and then you've imagine you've got to have a conversation about the salt water and the dealing with the corrosion from that. But
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that'd be, we'll call that Peter Thiel's version of version 1. And then Jensen Huang has got into the mix, and he's doing completely distributed data centers he's almost taking the Powerwall model from Elon, and he's like, I want you to get your own data center for your home and install it, and I'm going to pay you to have it installed, and then I will basically pay you back for your power bill, and I'll pay your Wi-Fi.
Okay. Elon, I think, threw out an idea a while back about Teslas and their capability.
Yes.
Because each of them has a processing capacity, and when idle could be used in some capacity for that distributed model idea.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
I haven't heard too much follow-up on that recently, But I imagine that's still in the cards because Elon's always got multiple things at hand. So if you want to, we can bring that into the mix too. So Elon's got two potential ideas to throw on this. But I say all that because, to your point about infrastructure, we had this conversation on the phone, is talking about like Texas, but to be honest, it's not just Texas, the US, it's also globally, is there's this balancing act of you want GDP because we're being honest, like this AI build out, whether it's software or hardware infrastructure, is one of the biggest revenue engines right now. At the same time, too, what's the point if you completely decimate our way of life right now and you see the ERCOT findings where it's like in 6 years, we're projected to have 330+% higher demand on the grid as is within Texas. Or by 2040, we're going to have 9% greater water usage than we have right now. I mean, there's areas in Texas like Corpus Christi, not even necessarily because of data center builds, but just because of all the industrialization's going on down there right now. They're having issues getting a hold of fresh, clean water to
Mm-hmm.
maintain their populace. And that's a very real critical issue that we're seeing. This isn't a third world problem that I think a lot of people, in the Western world where it's, we're more first world kind of think that exists. Just go to California. They have issues getting fresh, clean water. So, I mean, like, this is a problem that we need to figure out more so because it is a balancing act. Like, this is, for whether or not we want to admit it, this AI adoption and implementation is coming.
So do you think, number one, do you have the power and the water to sustain one of these operations, period? Like, let's use Texas since we're here in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
That's a question. But I think you also had some thoughts around, do we have the capacity from a project management and project approval permitting perspective to even really move at the speed with which, even if we're going to say, hey, all of these are good, we're going to do it. Do we have the plans in place to enable that
Yeah.
success?
So on the first part, when it comes to power, I think, and again, depends on how you want to go about this, because let's go back to Jensen Hung, because NVIDIA seems to be where, as multiple things I've listened to, and I've had the same thought. That seems to be where most of the value is sitting. He has open source in terms of solutions, not just the software and hardware sides. He wants this thing to work. And rightfully so, his company's now worth $5 trillion. So he's making all the money off of this right now. But his part is like, I don't need constant peak demand off the grid for data centers. Just give me what you want. If we need to throttle down, we'll throttle down. So his idea is not we need to get more power into the grid. He's like, we just need to optimize the transference of power on the grid to begin with. So if you think about that context, like now it's not necessarily a load problem, it's just a transmission of load problem. So it's like, is that more attainable to achieve than putting more power into the grid? In some ways, yes, it is. But is that still, the surefire way to fix the problem? I don't know, because we haven't done that yet. We don't have smart grids everywhere in this country. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like we haven't seen that. And likewise, too, when push comes to shove, is that going to be the case? Because you never know when, hyperscaler, or as I'm seeing now, like an omniscaler, because these mega corporations like an Alphabet or a Tesla or a Meta or Microsoft are going in multiple directions. Who's to say they don't supersede a whole entire populace and take their power as they need for a data center compared to, you know, Houston or Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, or Austin when push comes to shove? We haven't had that yet. So there's going to have to be some regulatory and governance that have to come into play there too and whatnot. So on the power side, I would say it's iffy, but we really need to have everyone come to the table to think about the best solution there. Now, I will say this, and it's going to sound kind of odd, but I think the water thing is going to kind of figure itself out. The reason why I say that, I've already had tons of people come to me and ask, like, okay, from a cooling standpoint, what are better optimal ways to do cooling? Like, can we use refrigerant or other things? So that's already like, because not shockingly to me, water is pretty precious, whether or not we want to think about it. And everyone assumes, like, hey, there's going to be no clean water. Everyone's like, nope. Like, that's, thank God, that's like a universal thing. People are like, nope, we're not going to have that.
That's
We're going
not
to
a
fix
good
that real
strategy.
quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to change that real quick. So I think that's going to figure itself out. But I think with the power, I think it's still iffy. But to your second point about product management and coordination and permitting, I've also been involved in this too, and this is a very interesting scenario. There's a lot of recruiters and recruitment coordinators trying to get people to help them build out data center projects. And this is even before, we started having pushback on these things. It doesn't matter what angle, whether it's the white collar kind of coordination roles, management roles of these projects, or the blue collar specialized technical vocation skill sets. If you look the world over, we don't have a very storied history of building out this infrastructure. So it's not an apples to apples scenario. We have to have people who have like had related or adjacent work to this. And to be honest too, especially since, I mean, I can't think of another time since, the Great Depression, FDR's days of the New Deal, we haven't built infrastructure to scale. So it's like we really haven't coordinated ourselves, whether it's a government assisted or corporate assisted, you know, guidance of this. We haven't really coordinated ourselves overall. Do I think it will get done? Yeah, because I think these hyperscalers, omniscalers, or what's called, are going to throw enough money at the problem to make it happen.
Yeah.
But it's going to lag.
That's where I was kind of going with that question is you hear the stories from California, so many billions of dollars go into a light rail that's not being built, right? And it's getting tied up in whatever, issues. And you hear about permitting restraint or even like the LA fire where they're not going to rebuild the houses because people can't get permits. And we're not in California, but do those same modern long-winded processes and red tape. Is the red tape going to allow these areas to move at the speed with which they're going to need to move in order to execute those projects? Just kind of a curiosity is we're going to see develop. How well does the business play with the government? I guess in allowing like I said, number one. Are you going to come up with a solution that's sustainable, reasonable for the populace, and is it going to be permitted and approved fast enough, or is it going to get left behind because there's too much red tape?
Yeah, and to be brutally honest, it's like the governance is a big part of it, and it's going to be splintered at the municipal, state, and federal level. Because if you look at there's a consensus at all those levels, they all are kind of different. If you look at the federal level, they're trying to, in their eyes, keep up with China and a dominance of technology race right now. So they're almost throwing caution to the wind. There has been a change in tone recently, and that's been more around the job standpoint because of some risk in there. And you're even seeing some things out of China, which I posted about today, where they've even had some pushback on like, hey, we can't just adopt this for the sake of putting people out of jobs because that causes societal instability, and that's not good either. So we need to be smart about this. But if you look at more of the state and city level, they're doing what we talked about from the onset, that balancing of, okay, it brings money, it brings jobs, whether it's in the short term to build this out or the long term to maintain. But likewise, too, if my populace is, charged into the ground for electricity and doesn't have any water, well, this isn't going to fly. So they're trying to balance that overall. But the other thing that's even more looming than all of that, to be perfectly blunt, is, and by no means am I political, but it's just speaking to actual geopolitical events. You know what the lead time for some of these components were, these data centers, before everything in Iran popped off? 2.5 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know what it is now?
No. 5.
Yeah. So that itself is a major issue, that unless we change where we're sourcing things from, things are going to be severely slowed and delayed on this overall. So I think that's a bigger issue overall. But to finish that thought out, I think in some ways, as silly as this may be to say, that actually might be a good thing, because instead of trying this push and push and push to add on, it kind of lets the conversation shift from what comes next to, well, how do we make what we have now?
Well, I've even seen some scenarios where you're repurposing equipment, buying used power generation equipment because, to wait for that lead time is not an option.
No.
So just go to the market and find equipment that will do, that you can put together that will do what you need. Okay. Well, I like, for me, I go to social media, I read what people have to say. I can't process all of it. I can't read every, long, wise post that people make, but to have someone like yourself, local, that I could read something that I thought resonated and say, why don't we dig into that? And I come from a time where white paper was a popular term, or research document or something like that. But I'm not one to just go sit and write out a 10-page narrative on a topic like this. But I think you can take that one little paragraph of a few digital transformation challenges and say, hey, that's worthy of a conversation. Let's unpack that a little bit. Let's talk about it, see how it relates. So I appreciate you taking the time to come by and sit with us.
Appreciate it.
And dig into that. So, all right. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.